Hi, this is Christian Novak. I'm a professor of practice at McGill University's Institute for the Study of International Development, where I focus on the topic of development financing, particularly on the effective use of public and private capital to help achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Today, I am delighted to be speaking with Professor of Practice Jamal Saghir. This is an important topic we will be discussing today about climate change adaptation and the issues related to global warming.
Many thanks, Professor Novak, for organizing this interview. I'm extremely happy to be with you today. It's an important topic close to a lot of Canadians' heart and international people as well. My name is Jamal Saghir. I'm a professor of practice at McGill University. I am a former director at the World Bank. I'm also distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut and fellow at the Penn Institute. So I'm very happy to speak about a subject which is close to my heart, on which I have been working for the last several years.
Thank you very much, Jamal. We're really delighted to have you with us today. As you know, the issues of global warming and in particular, how to adapt to climate change in the context of COVID-19 are getting a lot of attention in the international community. Jamal, you are the co-author of a major international report titled State and Trends Report on Adaptation 2020 to Climate Change, which was just issued by the Global Center of Adaptation, which, as we know, it's an international organization in the Netherlands. You also co-authored an important policy brief on climate adaptation in post-pandemic economic recovery at ISID. Can you please summarize the main findings in these two reports?
First of all, COVID-19 crisis is a wake-up call that our social and financial systems must be better prepared for the climate change crisis. Climate shocks are happening now, compounding risk and impacts alongside the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, especially for the most vulnerable. In fact, COVID-19 pandemic has caused the most severe recession in recent decades. It represents the most significant shock to the global economy in almost 100 years. What the International Monetary Fund has labeled the Great Lockdown, which has led to major reduction in both production and consumption. At the same time, climate change continues its worrisome trend. Climate disaster is no doubt a growing challenge on top of the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me give you some facts. Last year, tied with 2016 as the warmest year on record, according to NASA. Compared to the 1951-1980 baseline, the global average temperature was 1.02 degrees Celsius warmer in 2020. Recent research has shown also that the melting of the ice sheet worldwide has been faster than expected and in line with the IPCC worst case scenario over the past 3 decades. The losses in Greenland and Antarctic ice sheet melting has been the fastest. The fastest melting has pursued the rate of sea level raise to 4.8 millimeters per year. And the current estimate that the seas have risen as much as 20 centimeters since the 1990s. We have also over 50 million people who were affected in 2020 by flood, drought, and storms. Last year alone, the locust outbreak caused by unusual weather conditions was the largest in 25 years and left about 1 million people food insecure across the Horn of Africa. Finally, more than 2.2 million people in China had to be evacuated due to severe flooding in July 2020. All these climate disasters pile on the top of the global pandemic crisis, estimated to have pushed 150 million people into extreme poverty last year. And according to the World Bank, global extreme poverty rose in 2020 for the first time in more than 2 decades. And the long-term projections are equally worrisome. So what to do? That will be an important question, and this is what our report and what analysis our research has done. Government should, around the world, evaluate options and design economic and social and financial recovery program, while at the same time responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. I believe that achieving climate-compatible smart growth will require government to pursue growth-enhancing fiscal and structural reforms that support adaptation, resilient investment, backed up with efficient, cost-efficient adaptation policies. And what do we mean by adaptation? It means the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effect. Human beings need now to adapt. Mitigation is not enough. We have to adapt to this new reality. In my opinion, adapting and building resilience to climate impact will be therefore critical to the efficacy of response of the recovery effort. Yet, climate change adaptation finance flows are at risk of falling sharply in the coming years at a moment when adaptation finance has never been more important. And some action taken now by government, development financial institution, the private sector, and other stakeholders will be critical to determining the course of the recovery and the pathway toward a more climate resilient and sustainable future.
Thank you, Jamal. The plans to recover the effects of COVID-19 provide a unique opportunity to make economies and communities more adapted and resilient to climate change. Jamal, what are the key efforts needed?
Well, key effort would include mainly three interventions. Design recovery investment and infrastructure program to achieve the dual objective of rapid economic recovery and enhanced climate adaptation and resilience. Second, create a new financial instrument and mobilize private financing for adaptation and resilience. And thirdly, innovation, new technology, and better governance are key for accelerated change and scale in climate adaptation. In addition, to keep climate resilient recovery in reach, I would see 6 major actions are needed. First, you need to maintain or better increase overseas development assistance level. ODA is critical financing adaptation, especially in the low-income country, who are most vulnerable to climate change. In June 2020, the OECD estimated that total external finance across both public and private sector sources for countries eligible for ODA will fall by around 700 billion in 2020. And given the accelerating climate risk, it will be more important than ever that the donor communities commit to continued funding for developing countries' adaptation. Second, we have to work on collaborating on debt relief, an area, Christian, that you know very well. Countries participating in G20 limited debt service suspension initiative are also the most climate vulnerable, and therefore efforts are needed to ensure that countries can make investment in resilience and to expand debt relief to those most vulnerable countries which are currently engaged. We need also to work on mainstreaming climate risk into liquidity support. We need also to think about implementing whole of a government adaptation planning and policy, therefore developing national adaptation plan, improving cross-government coordination. We need also to think about improving climate risk data from public and private sector. Without data, we cannot take the right decision. We need finally to adopt consistent and comparable metrics, because currently adaptation finance is measured solely on input-based, which challenge for tracking and also reducing incentive for some projects. So this is very important. These are the action and the effort that I believe the international community, whatever government, NGOs, private sector, public-private, need to undertake.
Thank you, Jamal. This makes adaptation to climate change needs to accelerate even more important. What would you suggest to be done in this regard?
Well, this is an important question indeed. I believe several actions are needed to be done by government, international organization, developing financial institution, and the private sector. They have many tools at their disposal to foster a resilient recovery in the coming years. We need to deploy those instruments and those resources. Each stakeholder needs to understand which adaptation intervention can meet near-term and long-term recovery objective across economic, health, social, and climate dimension. Sector to focus on include natural-based solution, climate adaptation health, water and sanitation project, food security, and agricultural supply chain resilience, and resilient infrastructure planning and implementation. Moreover, a diverse area of financial instrument can be used to increase investment and adaptation. And I see at least 4 factors impact the type of financial instrument. Speed of implementation required. Second, private investment environment. Third, sovereign debt levels. And finally, monitoring and evaluation capacity. And among the key financial instruments for mobilizing adaptation finance in the context of the recovery would include COVID response facilities and issuing bond that mainstream climate risk consideration, a liquidity support that incorporate climate risk governance requirement, a reduced insurance premium payment for climate risk insurance schemes in developing countries, especially the most vulnerable. Fourth, a debt relief and debt for adaptation swap for free fiscal space to be able to address climate risk. And finally, an area that you know very well, Christian, which is public-private partnership to address climate risk.
Fantastic, Jamal. Thank you for sharing all that with us. Now, this brings me to the last question, Jamal. Can you please briefly give us examples of how adaptation to climate change at scale is actually possible?
Adaptation at scale is feasible, is possible, and it's a must. Let me give an example of a few countries. Bangladesh, from the Great Gola cyclone in 1970 that claimed over 300,000 lives to Cyclone Fani in 2019 with a much reduced toll of 17 deaths. Imagine Bangladesh among those countries that was able to adapt. The evacuation of 1.6 million people before the Cyclone Fani hit in April 2019 showed how adaptation at scales is possible in the country. And Bangladesh was able to put a system in place, put early warning, organize itself, so when the cyclone hit, less people died. Again, let me repeat, in 1970, the cyclone get 300,000 people dead. In 2019, Cyclone Fani, 17 only. Let's make another example, Ethiopia. The Productive Safety Net program has been one of the largest social protection schemes in sub-Saharan Africa since 2005. During the 2016 El Nino, which influenced drought, the Productive Safety Net program was extended to temporarily cover 18 million people, 20% of the population, to avoid a famine and protect them from falling into poverty. In other words, they were prepared, they had a safety net, could protect the poor, could help adapt, and they were adapting to a situation when they would hit by drought, like what happened in 2016. Finally, in China, in 2020, the length of the rainy season across most of southern China reached its highest level in around 20 years. In many places, lasting nearly twice as long as average. However, far fewer lives were lost compared with catastrophic flood similarly happened in 1998, where more than 4,000 people died and 7 million homes were destroyed. And that's in large part due to the restoration of close to 300,000 hectares of food plain together with reforestation. The Sponge City Initiative, known in China in 2015, has been extended to 30 pilot cities, and the goal is for 80% of urban area covered under that project to absorb and reuse at least 70% of rainwater by 2030. This is a few examples how the world is adapting to this new reality. The 21st century will be all about adaptation to climate change. We are living on a world which is mad, climate, pandemic, geopolitics, geoeconomic, it's changing the nature. I think the 21st century will be a century where the climate change will be one of the major threat to humanity if we don't take action in the short term to really avoid that future generation pay the price of what happened in the 2000s. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamal. This has been a tremendously interesting discussion. We do understand that this is close to your heart, but I can emphasize that this is literally the heart of the world. I do strongly recommend the audience to take a look at Jamal's policy briefs and reports on the subject, and we look forward to having further discussions with you and other professors of practice in the future. Thank you very much again, everyone.
Thank you.